Welcome to episode 19. How can I manage my thoughts?
I have a daily battle with thoughts. I think we all do.
Well, let's start there.
Okay. Because I've mulled over these thoughts that actually nothing's happened. I'm just catastrophizing in my head.
Our thoughts are either rooted in fear or faith. You don't run away from thoughts. If anything, actually, you run to them and you manage them.
I would phone my parents every day and say to them, I think I'm going to die. Because it was so real. I felt like I was going to die. This is not supposed to happen on a podcast.
Welcome to episode 19 of The Winning Life. My name is Gareth Morgan.
I'm Leanne Morgan.
And we are hosting a conversation that we believe will help unlock your potential to deliver your purpose to the world, to create a plan that sees the immeasurably more that is in you come to a reality. And that is exciting, Leanne, isn't it?
That does sound very, very exciting.
We are enthusiastic today. We are excited. And we are ready to talk about this subject today, because this subject that we're going to go on to, I think, is possibly one of the most important subjects that we'll look at, and probably one of the most life-defining subjects.
I agree.
So before we go into the actual question itself, let me ask you something. Have you ever had an idea for something and then that idea just never worked? Like, can you think of something where you had this idea, maybe it was in your sleep, maybe it was while you were, I don't know, in the shower, where all good ideas happen. Have you ever had an idea for something that just then, in your mind, it was like brilliant, but then just did not work?
I mean, I'm sure there has been many things like that. Mine are usually around things like DIY things or like home improvement things, like, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And then I get the stuff and I'm like, didn't quite work out as I thought it would be. But yeah, I definitely, and I'm sure there's more over the years that have happened, because I think it always in your mind, it's a lot clearer, or the expectation is higher. Oh, it's going to look like this. And then in reality I go, oh, you know, that didn't happen quite as I thought it was going to be. So yeah. And
then what about an idea that did work? Have you got, think of your most recent success of an idea. So like you just said, so let's stick on that subject, because DIY, you love making environments.
Yeah, and home improvement, things like that.
Yeah. So something, things that have gone wrong, obviously you've just said, you have an idea, doesn't happen, or doesn't turn out the way that you thought, or maybe it was inspired by something on social media or something. But what has gone right?
I do like to have an idea of how something will look, and I'm always really happy when, even in the middle of that project, it's beginning to turn out or even better than I had thought. So for instance, recently we renovated kind of one of the rooms in our centre, and I had just a picture in my mind of what it would look like, had got kind of ideas. Didn't spend that long, because in my head it was like this glorious technicolor massive plan. Anyway, just began to kind of work it through, and it was much better than I'd imagined. But actually, weirdly, it is funny when you're seeing in reality what you've thought in your mind. That is weird, but nice weird.
Nice weird.
Yeah, and also like decorating. I always, at home, I have ideas, and painted the hallway that a little bit recently, and in my mind I was like, is this going to work, doing the paint this way? But it did. So.
And on that journey, have there been moments when you started out and it was a great idea, and then just part way in it was like, not sure this is a good idea?
Every time.
But you kept on going, and it ended up turning out good. Yeah,
there's always, particularly if you're into kind of like painting or home improvement or decoration or that kind of thing,
which I'm not,
which you're not, but I do like to do, although I haven't done any that recently. But it's always, because it's so much effort, you kind of halfway through and you look how far you've come, it's too far to turn back, you've got to push through, and you're just like and I always say something to you, don't I, like, just remind me to never do this again,
which I do, but you ignore.
Well, yeah, because the result is always great, so go back.
So the reason I mentioned that is because I was talking about ideas and ideas that work and ideas that don't work, or ideas that appear to not be working, but then because you stick with them, they actually do end up working. And sometimes even better than you could have imagined. But I was thinking about this. How powerful are ideas?
Yeah.
How powerful everything that we have in life, even right now, what we're doing, broadcasting over the internet, started off as an idea.
Oh, my brain can't wrap around that at all. That's a huge idea. Like, how is that even happening?
It's happening. We don't need to know how it's happening.
I just push the buttons and it happens, but I don't know how it happens.
But even just the everything around us now in this room, all that's benefiting our mission, that's helping you hopefully with what we're producing. It all started with an idea. But an idea at its core is a thought.
Yes.
And that leads to today's subject matter. And the reason I kind of went that route into the subject matter is because when you hear the question that we're dealing with, we can sometimes immediately start off from a negative place.
Yeah.
But it absolutely includes negativity and how we process that. But the question is, how can I manage my thoughts? How can I manage my thoughts? So thoughts that are constructive, thoughts that are destructive. They're both. Okay, so we were just talking about some constructive thoughts, but then there, of course, are negative thoughts. So if, Leanne, constructive thoughts, like ideas to produce, to create, that's on the positive side. What's been your experience of the negative side? And of course, we've all got stories to tell of this.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about I have a daily battle with thoughts. I think we all do.
Well, let's start there.
Okay. Like how we just made ourselves comfortable there. Like, tell me your negative thoughts.
Tell me.
But
I should have a couch.
It's a daily battle. From the minute I wake up, there's a chatter inside of my head, a conversation that's not, I've got to say, probably the majority of the time it isn't a positive topic or isn't a positive kind of feeling to it. It will be what I'm worried about, what I've got to do, when whatever, and it's always negative because it's out of worry or anxiety or fear or trepidation or whatever it might be. It's usually processing what happened yesterday and I've got to sort that out today. So it's my thoughts. If I don't kind of come down on them hard every morning, that could set a really negative trajectory for the day for me, and has done on numerous occasions, because my thoughts are so strong. Sometimes they are stronger than reality. So what I think isn't always true, but it is so strong it will shape actually what happens. And sometimes I've, like, even in the shower or processing, I'm having a conversation, and by the end of it, I'm so worked up and cross or frustrated or sad because I've mulled over these thoughts that actually nothing's happened. I'm just catastrophizing in my head.
What a good word.
That is a good word. Everything is going to end in a catastrophe. And rather than going, God, this is over to you. So it's by somehow mulling over those thoughts, it's like I'm trying to get some control over them. Now, going back kind of 4 years ago nearly, is it? No, 3.5 years ago, hit a really bad situation with thoughts and allowed the negative, and I'm not just talking a little bit of kind of bad thinking, serious negative thoughts and catastrophizing, which led to a complete mental shutdown, really. But that was because I was just dwelling on thoughts as if they were real, as if my thoughts were real reports of what was happening, but they weren't. They were just my brain going into absolute haywire.
Wow. So it's quite interesting. Just a few things that you've said there that I'll pick up on, because I think it's really helpful for us to process and for everybody to kind of just have a look at this. Our thoughts are either rooted in fear or faith.
Yeah.
And when I talk about faith, I'm talking about the sense of certainty and confidence. And of course, where your faith is placed then is a bigger question. And then fear, which is, if our thoughts are rooted in fear, then just like, if you plant an apple seed, it will produce apples. If you plant an orange seed, you'll produce oranges. If we plant a fear-based thought, it will produce, a destructive outcome. If we place a faith-based thought, it will produce kind of positive fruit.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important distinction that you just highlighted, which is why, again, just before we go on to how can I manage my thoughts, the question, why should I manage my thoughts, is so important. Because you just said, and I absolutely believe it to be true, that actually our thoughts end up being more powerful in our lives and actually in shaping other people's lives at times than reality itself.
Definitely. The reality, 3.5 years ago, the stuff that I was thinking wasn't happening, but in my head it was real. So then that's how my thoughts became so powerful. They were literally driving everything, to the point of it affected weight loss, dramatic weight loss, illness. I actually thought myself into sickness. Like relying on certain medications. Your brain is far more powerful than you imagine, which is a good thing, but also something we have to manage. Because if the kind of opposite is happening, where there is faith leading the thoughts, the possibilities are endless. It is exciting.
So the upside is on this subject is huge.
It's
The
incredible.
downside
is also huge.
Yeah.
I think the good thing is that there's always a way out, and we'll obviously talk about that. But it's about learning to have that conversation with yourself to go, right, you need to not think about this anymore. I remember in that time, somebody, I can't remember who it was, said to me, I allow myself like 1 or 2 minutes to get those thoughts out, and then that's it. You just go, no, that's what I'm worried about, that's what I'm thinking about, and that is it. You do not worry past this point. So rather than just kind of going, no, ignore that it's there, face the reality. These are the things that I'm thinking about right now, and they're scaring me or making me afraid or worried, but that's it now. We don't give them any more airtime in my mind.
So ignoring thoughts isn't an option, and I'm pretty sure that anybody that's clicked on this episode because you saw the title or the question, you clicked on it because you recognize actually it is important. So I think we're at least at that baseline that managing my thought life is very important. But I think I would say probably the majority of people that I come into contact with, that I speak to, don't necessarily have a strategy in place to do this. No. So they recognize its importance. They recognize the impact of the upside and the downside of thoughts, which produce ideas. But there's no strategy in place. And therefore, if there's no strategy, it can be haphazard whether people are managing it or not. And of course, if we don't manage our thoughts manage us.
They'll rule everything. If you're not careful, they will literally rule everything. And it's hard because it's the one place you cannot escape from.
Yeah.
Because it's not a physical place you can run from. You cannot escape from it. So you have to be in control and have to manage it. Absolutely.
In fact, just as you saying that, just a light-hearted thought came to mind. I remember when I was a kid, and I used to wind up my sisters. And
did you? I can't imagine that.
I have 3 sisters, and I wound them up, and then they would end up chasing me. I always remember, I have this vivid memory of being chased by my sisters with snooker cues. and literally being chased, and then them chasing it and cornering me. And like literally, I locked myself in the bathroom.
What are they going to do? Beat you with them?
I'm not sure. Or pot me, because there was snooker cues. And I just remember, like running away, like avoiding them at all costs, and to the point where I think I wet myself. But I was young. I think about 18 at the time. No, I wasn't. I was about 6, I think, something like that. But again, I was just thinking about that in terms of, thoughts are stimulated, so just like I would wind up my sisters, thoughts are generated by some stimulus, either something that we've chosen to do or something that's happening around us, and it will trigger a thought.
Yeah.
And what I was doing in that instance is I was running away, and that led to me wetting myself. But what we're saying here is that you don't run away from thoughts. If anything, actually, you run to them and you manage them. You learn to rule them rather than be ruled by them.
In every episode of the Winning Life podcast, you will hear Gareth and Leanne talk about the importance of getting a plan for your personal and professional life. That's why they have developed the MVP plan. When you develop your MVP plan, surprising opportunities and uncommon results follow. The MVP plan provides you with a clear structure to begin to see how your goals can turn into reality. Starting out with setting the goals, highlighting milestones, and planning individual tasks, you'll begin to see how the MVP plan is key to experiencing the results you've always wanted to have in order to make an impact in this world. Visit thewinninglife.tv today to get access to your plan and the steps on how to use it.
And there's a psalm in Psalm 139, verse 3. And in the last episode, we touched on the fact that psalms are brilliant. They're brutally honest reflections of humanity and as humans, our conversation with the divine, with God, our creator, and sometimes our complaints, our of not knowing why something is happening or why am I thinking this, and then kind of almost then the response of, you know, what does God say about this? And I think it was David who said this. He said, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts." Now, David, no, everyone I think in the Bible, apart from Jesus, messed up. You know, so great. We can all identify. The Bible is not this representation of when I say saints, I mean saints as in like perfect people that we cannot attain to that level. They are real people, but David was arguably one of the most successful people in terms of an example of somebody who would follow God and would make an impact. And of course, he became king and ruler and one of Israel's most celebrated kings, even to this day. Even people who are not Christians, but of the Jewish faith or even just Israel's history would recognize that. And why was he so successful? Well, because he learned how to process his internal world. He didn't hide from it. He didn't have this, again, as sometimes, as men particularly, I think women are more open to processing their internal world. Men are a bit more like, well, you know, it's all about the exterior and kind of how I'm being perceived. But David was so authentic. He was so open and would process what is in his heart. And when the Bible talks about the heart, it's not talking about this heart in our chest. It's talking about the subconscious mind, the deep part of who we are, which of course, again, is the source of our thoughts. So Leanne, just coming back to kind of, again, your journey, because I think whilst we both can speak to this, I do think, you know, your journey is a really powerful story of this. When David says, "Search me, God, and know my heart, test me and know my anxious thoughts," how do you view that verse in the light of the fact that we just don't feel like doing that? We don't want to face those thoughts. We'd rather run from them than rather run to them. Like, how did you apply that verse or that principle during that time?
It's interesting because when you are in that depth of thought, you feel very, very alone, because what those thoughts do is they isolate you from everyone around you. And so for a long period of time felt very lonely in my thoughts, because you can't see into my head. Nobody else can see. You were surrounded
by family and so much attention during that time.
Huge support, which I'm eternally grateful for, because I could not function, barely get in the shower, let alone anything else. So to have the support was incredible. However, you feel so trapped. Unless you've been there, it's very, very hard to describe that kind of that feeling of being locked in your mind. And so to feel isolated and alone, actually those verses inviting God into it, at first it's terrifying because for a start, I even questioned God. I got angry with God. There was a whole process there that I had to go through. How dare God allow me to go through this? Why didn't he just, lift me up out of it? Why is he allowing me to go through this anxiety, etc.? Then when I got over that and worked through that, I then invited God to help me with my thoughts. So
Which wasn't an overnight process, by the way, because that sounded in that moment that you were just saying it was like then an hour later I got over it. No, that was a prolonged
It was
period.
months of weeks and months of working through. And even now I have to manage that on a much bigger scale than I probably did before. So that, whereas at first I was angry and cross and felt alone, actually inviting God to come and help me with those thoughts was really, really what changed it. In fact, a few months ago, I was looking through, which is why it's another good idea to keep a journal or to keep kind of...
Yeah, we're going to come on to this, the strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was able to look back a little while ago to 3 years exactly to the day, and I was sat in the same place 3 years to the day, which is very, very strange.
Wow.
When I wrote those things.
Wow.
And seeing what a mess my mind was in, but seeing the process of just writing down stuff to allow God to come in and change. And some of the stuff that I said I wanted to do, I'm now doing. The things that I thought I'd never do again, I am, and that's where it's that process. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. You're inviting God into your mess and saying, come and help me here.
Now that's an important point just to press pause on, because, and again, we do this podcast, this conversation is for anybody, people of faith, no faith, just to be part of, because we're talking about everyday challenges, everyday opportunities, everyday growth points. And the reality is, people can help us with our thoughts, processing thoughts, and
I did have help from counsellors, from family members, Christian friends, had tons of help, and all brilliant stuff.
And so, and we are 100% advocates of that.
Definitely.
Surrounding yourself with the right voices, and it actually, probably more importantly, with the right ears.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's more about
listening,
allowing people to process those thoughts out loud without somebody trying to fix and to try and remedy those thoughts.
Yeah.
So huge advocates of that, and that is a key piece of managing our thoughts. But what you mentioned there, when you are, and again, I've got to say, I've not been in this position, so that's why I'm asking you to speak on it. But when you're in that prison and surrounded by loving people, but inside alone in an isolated cell, in that moment, the only person that can step in is spiritual. They have to be spiritual, because it's your heart. It's the part of you that is spirit. So another human can't step into the spirit. Only spirit can step into spirit. Okay. And again, without going down a rabbit trail here, that can go two ways. But we're talking about God who is love, and God who is light, and God who is joy and hope. So God steps in, but only when invited in.
Absolutely. So there's numerous times where I probably cried out to God, like, God help me, but I wasn't really asking him to come and help me. It was probably just out of I wanted to be just out of it. I just wanted an exit out of the situation. I wasn't really saying, God, can we work this through with me? I was just like, God, get me out of this. And because I didn't just instantly feel better, that's when I then said, are you even listening? Are you even there? Do you even care? Are you even real? All things that I have said sorry to God for since, and but God understands. He's not, the things that we say and feel, he's not offended by. He hurts when we hurt. So, but then that was a different prayer of saying, God, please, can you help me sort this out? And there's a responsibility that's ours, which is to work on things, and then God's responsibility is to bring the fruit.
Yeah.
So we have to do the groundwork. He allows the results to happen. And it was only as I went into the groundwork of applying my absolute shed of a brain and a mind to looking, unpacking stuff. And you must have got frustrated with me over time. It's almost like you almost get it and then you don't, you're back to, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back the whole way. It wasn't like a nice straight progression and over those, a 10-week plan and you're back to normal. It wasn't like that.
I'll tell you, again, my imagination came up with an example of what it was like.
Oh dear.
What's that thing? What's that activity in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, right at the end when they're running up the mountain. Is it a mountain, or they call it something mountain, or the one I mean? The
very final,
where they've got water.
Yeah, well, it's a slight incline.
It's a slight incline. They're trying to make their way across. There's wind machines blowing them off.
Everyone loves that. I can't remember what it's called.
Somebody let us know in the comment section, please.
It's the final part, and they all want to get to that. They all want to get to there. Yeah, because it's loads of fun as well. But there's everything's water against them.
100%. There's water. There's these huge balls
like water
that are flying
cannons,
across.
And it's just constant obstacles thrown at them.
But that's what it was like. Because you could make your way 3/4 up, and then literally one ball, boosh, slide all the way back down.
That is a brilliant analogy, because that's exactly, and it's like doing that like them on no food.
It's like, I'm locked in my thoughts, get me out of here.
Yeah. And they're all starving because they've been living on rice and beans, and essentially when you're like that in your mind, you also are starved mentally and spiritually and emotionally, and for me it was physically as well, because I wasn't eating. So everything is very, very weak, and you're still trying to compete this course. I need to find out what it's called.
We do.
But that's exactly what it's like. So you have to keep going and work, but then God brings the result. That's the amazing thing. We can't manufacture that or manipulate that. We have to go to work and persevere, and he brings the result. So
interesting you just said, and we're going to come on to land on the very practical here of how do I get a strategy together, or what strategy could I adopt and try to manage my thoughts. But interesting enough, you said in the moment, and what we're saying is managing my thoughts is not how can I get them taken away. Actually, when you cried out in prayer, essentially God take them away. He didn't answer that prayer. And there's a reason, because actually he doesn't want to necessarily take them away. He wants to take us through. He wants to take us through, because actually it's when we persevere through the challenge that the growth happens. Yeah. And again, I can obviously say this from my vantage point, had God answered your prayer of get me out of here, then you would have not been developed to the level at which you are now. And we're always on that journey, but we certainly wouldn't be doing this right now.
No.
And so, because your perception of yourself was almost, that process almost had to kill off the old version in order for the new version to come through. It is death. It felt like death for you. We were observing quite literally almost like a death of a person to some extent in terms of the way that they thought.
Yeah.
But actually, with the absolute belief that on the end of this, again, if we process this correctly, and from our point of view, it starts at the spiritual and then out to the practical, physical, and then who we surround ourselves with, then amazing things will come out of it.
Definitely.
So let's go to the practical now. So you mentioned journaling. What can somebody do? And again, the differentiator here is that we're not even just saying, do this when you start getting bad thoughts. This is actually, because remember, thoughts are both, there's a high upside and a low downside. So actually, we want to actively be managing our thoughts daily. In other words, we want a rhythm, not just a reaction. So from your experience, what can people do to adopt a process, a strategy where those thoughts are being managed so we can actually unlock their potential?
They probably started from just writing down everything that I felt, that I was struggling with, and it's simple as that. to begin with, if that's all you can imagine, this is how I feel, or this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm most afraid of, this is what I'm processing, this is what's destroying me, this is what, all of those things.
So you're kind of asking yourself those questions.
Yeah. And
what am I thinking?
Yeah,
what
and sometimes which is another whole thing, but I would be afraid to write it on the paper in case it became reality. So because my thoughts were so dark and anxious, I was afraid to write them out. What if they become
superstitious, which is rooted in fear,
and worried that somehow evil forces would see it and make that happen. Just ridiculous stuff that would come into my mind, and I'd be afraid. So I had to break that and write it out and make that almost like a prayer. And then I would also balance that with listening to stuff that would edify me. By that I mean would literally feed my spirit. So I would listen to podcasts, I would listen to messages that would be specific on those particular areas. And do you know what's really interesting? I subscribed, I've just unsubscribed to a lot of them only recently, to a whole heap of podcasts on anxiety. Now, and they were not, probably none of them were kind of spiritual Christian at all. They were just people who were kind of experts, etc. And so there was some good stuff. But honestly, they dealt with the symptoms. They never dealt with the root problem, because they can't, because it's spirit. Now, I am not saying don't listen to those things. I did, and some things were helpful. But I found like I was just going round in a circle, constantly examining my thoughts, but not actually dealing with sorting out the nitty gritty.
It's like pulling the leaves off a weed.
Yeah, it's like
not actually getting to the root.
No, exactly. It's like constantly taking Calpol or paracetamol for a temperature, but not getting to what actually is the infection behind it and treating it with antibiotics. So the antibiotic for me was like, actually, no, I need to go and feed my spirit and allow that to filter through. And that's a harder process, honestly, because you feel like you're not sorting out the problem. But anyway, I did that, and I started to write down what I really felt and some key things that people said and that you said, and you helped me. Then it was about getting a vision, so looking forward. That was my fear. This is difficult for me to talk about, actually, even mention it, but I would phone my parents every day and say to them, I think I'm going to die. Because it was so real. I felt like I was going to die. So for me, it was like you would help me look up the future. This is not supposed to happen on a podcast. And write down, what are we going to do when I'm 60? What am I going to do when I'm 70, when I'm 80, when I'm 90 even? And that was helpful because it got me out of the rut of I'm going to die and got me thinking about there was a future. And then after that, I moved on from that to, moved on to looking at, actually, I made a commitment that there would be 2 things I would write in my journal every night. And I stopped doing this after a while because you change the way you journal and you adapt it. But I would write one thing that I'm going to do tomorrow, because that's like it would be I'm going to eat dinner. It was that big. I'm going to do this, and I'm believing God is going to do this. So it was like my work and what I'm having faith for. Honestly, 50% of the time, God didn't do the things that I said he was going to do, because God's not a robot or a genie in a lamp. If I do this, you do this. But what it did is it raised my level of faith and expectation. So I probably 80 to 90% of the time did stick to, I'm going to do this. It would be like, I'm going to eat dinner, or I'm going to do something with the children, or I'm going to clean the house, or I'm going to, it was like practical things. And God, you're going to help me, and I'm not going to have this pain, or whatever. And it was kind of this thing that I went hand in hand with God, and then it progressed into walking, and I walked an awful lot. That's probably what contributed to the weight loss. Went walking, and I would listen to the Bible and talk and pray, and I would go out early every morning, and it became part of a routine. So I think it develops as it goes on, but it's just this process of inviting God into the spiritual rather than just tackling my thoughts. Actually, what is behind this? And honestly, they're still there sometimes. It isn't like they vanish. It isn't like, oh, done that, right, tick, move on, new thing. I think sometimes when there's a weakness there, it's there for a reason. But like Paul teaches us that it's actually in that weakness, that's where we're strong, because that is where God comes in. That's where his strength is made perfect in my weakness. So in those moments when I feel like those thoughts are coming back, I have to go back to my spirit. Right, what am I believing that's wrong? What have I got to realign myself to?
Yeah, and I think that's amazing and so real and raw. And the truth is, the thoughts are powerful. And if you think about it this way, and I know we're running out of time here, but again, if we believe that there is a battle between good and evil, which of course we do, and I think most people would believe that, even that don't necessarily put any kind of figurehead on who's behind that. If your thoughts have the power to create something, like an idea that is going to truly bring about something positive, transformative, impactful, then there is an opposing force who wants to turn that power in on you. It's almost like a gun. It's like a gun is powerful and obviously can fire out, but it's almost like if that enemy can get you to turn that gun in on yourself. So to take that, and I know a gun isn't necessarily a great analogy, but it's about directed power. If an enemy can get you to redirect that power in and on yourself, then it will to destroy. That same power, just simply misdirected. Misdirected power. And what I love about what you said there, and I think the strategy here, and journaling is part of it, asking yourself those questions. One of the things that I do as well is kind of, and I've helped other people to do, is with maybe a book or a journal in front of you. On one side, okay, what's the fear? Really unpack that fear. Don't hide it, expose it. Put it on the paper, create distance between you and it so that you're observing it. And then on the right side, put faith. Okay, what is it I know to be true? What is it I believe to be true? And that's what you were doing, even about just literally, I'm going to do this and then this is going to happen. And you were almost, you were saying, okay, this is what I'm asking, this is what I'm believing, and I'm leaving no room for doubt that that's going to take place. And so again, James, finish off with this verse, James 1:6-7 says, when you ask, you must believe and do not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. And you can only take so much on a boat being tossed around by the wind. And we've been on boats where that's been happening and people throwing up over the side.
Yeah, that was not nice.
It was not nice, but that's what happens. We become unstable. And we don't get what we expect because actually we've not stuck to that certain belief, that faith. And of course, ultimately, it's in the one who can deliver that. And so, I really hope that this episode has started to help you understand the necessity for creating a strategy for managing your thoughts. Again, let's stay in the conversation. Like Leanne said, this isn't even just listening to this and then everything gets sorted. It's a process. But it's because at the root of this is a powerful tool for good that God has given to us to create, to contribute, to impact, to influence. And so, we really need to keep feeding into this. So thank you, Leanne, for being honest and raw. And this episode should be sponsored by some form of tissue.
Kleenex or whatever.
So, and other brands are available. So from me, Gareth Morgan.
And me, Leanne Morgan.
You take care and we will see you next time.
We hope that you enjoyed that episode. And if you enjoyed it, please go and subscribe over on all of our channels on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and not forgetting your favorite podcast platform. And if you head over to thewinninglife.tv, you'll be able to find all the resources available to you. Gareth has written several books which will help you on your discovery to building stronger and better lives. Come and join us for the next episode.